Mondays with Mike. Okay, air traffic control. It was reported on May 8th that they're going to upgrade air traffic control. Is this good news, or is there more to the story and is not good news?
Oh, it's great news if they're actually doing it. The more to the story is that they tried to do it during the Biden administration. They passed a whole bunch of legislation, billions of dollars, and then the Republicans were like, nah, not going to do it. And so the whole issue is that they've tried in many administrations to get this done. And it's better news that the administration's signaling that they're doing it as opposed to not making any effort at all. So that's the good news. The not so great news is that for them to actually do it, to implement any kind of change or reform or any kind of transformation on this scale would require huge delays and a lot of money. And it's not so clear they'll even be able to do it, that the Republicans will even play ball and actually give them the money. Because it's one thing for them to say, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to implement this huge plan that's going to cost billions of dollars. Remember, Congress appropriates the money. It's not so clear Congress is going to give them the money. That's where we're at. So great news that they're sending the message loud and clear. Yeah, this is a problem. Yes, we need to fix it now. But time will tell whether it actually gets fixed, because that's the whole impediment for all the good things in the United States is it's, oh, let's build a giant highway system. We need the money. So then you strong arm people through, that's how Eisenhower did it. It was, you have to negotiate just a huge number of deals and eminent domain. That was a whole thing. It took a long time. But the same can be said for this, that the scale of change that they're talking about for trying to change the current structure is just mind-bogglingly large. It's going to be the same issue that they're dealing with that bridge in Baltimore of rebuilding. It's just a huge endeavor. And those kinds of endeavors require that everybody's on the same page through multiple administrations. So the real issue is, do you remember when Trump came into office and he tried to cancel all the federal grants and loans? Some of those grants and loans that he tried to cancel were huge infrastructure projects that were going on for 20, 30, 40 years, building bridges, building roads, building highways. If you have another president come in and nope, don't like it, gonna cancel it, what do? This goes back to that bipartisanship issue in the United States, that they have to agree to at least some things for those things to actually happen. It's the same impediment for that train in California that has taken way too long to build, is that other countries have the ability to make things happen, right? They can say this will happen and then it happens. But the downside of that is you get a political system that's less responsive to the people, right? That's less representative of what the people want, because it's just someone in control saying do this or else, right? And they'll do it. You'll see those pictures of them building a highway around some guy's house. He's, I don't want to leave. Like, build around you, right? You will be an island unto your own in the middle of this giant highway. You'll have no access to anything. You won't get access to water, electricity, a road. You'll have no way. You'll just be a living example of somebody who didn't agree to do what we said to do. And that's a little more difficult in the US because people have property rights and you need things like eminent domain to make things actually happen. I guess the one upside is that to change air traffic control, they do own most of these airports, so they have a lot of power to make the change. No, it's good news. But the more to the story part is that while it is good news to say it, it's not so clear that they can do it. It's not even clear that Trump agrees with doing it. That's where I'm a little confused as to where Duffy comes out and says, oh, we're just going to do this huge sweeping, multi-billion project that's going to require employing a lot of people and spending a lot of money. All the while Trump's endorsing firing lots of people and canceling all the money other than a handful of things. So the messaging's a little all over the place.
Yeah. In these days, you don't know if Trump tomorrow isn't going to come out and say, we're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. And one of the biggest examples of waste is the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Yet many people don't know this, but he was on a ship, 1812, and he saw the dawn's early light. And he was on a ship, and they can go by ship. So it's waste. It's waste. They don't need a bridge. They should go by ship. And every time they go by a big, beautiful ship, they should think and sing Star Spangled Banner. You just don't know what he's going to do. You just don't know what he's going to say. He could do that. Oh, Really quick, this wasn't on the thing, but he's reopening Alcatraz. And I made a joke that he was going to we love Alcatraz, but then he does it. Oh my gosh!
And remember, talk about waste. Alcatraz was one of the most expensive prisons in existence to operate. He just wants to bring it back somehow. So that one's a little strange, right? It hasn't been open as a prison for many years. We're talking like 70, a long time. And so it's super weird that he's just, okay, let's have Alcatraz as a prison again. Make it
No.
happen. The thing that's always a little weird is with Congress to appropriate the money. He just says, do it with the money you have. And the whole issue there is when you do something with the money you currently have that's already been appropriated or budgeted for the things you're already doing, then the trade off is that somewhere, something else is going to receive less money. The question then is what's going to have to be closed or what services are going to be lost reopening Alcatraz? Because where's the money going to come from? Who's going to do it? Is there political will to make it happen? These are all questions that don't necessarily have an answer. But that's the Trump administration, that they do things without necessarily gaming out. We saw that with the reciprocal tariff thing. It's what's going to happen when you impose these wide sweeping tariffs on the whole world's economy without really gaming out what the response will be. Is it really acceptable to shut down, for example, with China, virtually all trade? And how many of these small businesses are going to be bailed out when they no longer have product they can sell and they can't make ends meet and they have to shutter their doors, fire all their employees? I think that's the big contradiction. Is Trump's going, "Oh, we're going to impose all these tariffs, but what about the jobs people currently have? How many people are going to lose their jobs in the next few months because the supply chain for all the goods that are sold that people buy from China just vanishes, right? Supply chain has already been disrupted. It takes time to make stuff. It takes weeks to bring stuff to the United States. It's not so clear that they had any plan in place for when that's going to happen, right? The question is, how severe does this short-term pain have to be economically, and is it worth what we gain in return? Technology has been moving so fast with robots and AI that it's not even clear that people will get these jobs in these factories. If they bring the factories back, it's not so clear that people will even be working in those factories when, oh, it's going to be a generational thing. You're going to have the kids and the grandkids and the grandparents. They're all going to work in the same job in the same factory for life. You're just going to hand down the factory jobs. Everyone's going to just aspire to work in the factories, making these, turning those little tiny screws, the iPhones. That's the future, right? That's the future we aspire to as a society. No. Why do we tell people to go to college to study and innovate and try to reach for the stars, literally? And then we're going to regress back into the industrial revolution. Anyways.
You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. Do you have anything to say about the new pope? It's like, oh, new pope, cool. Ooh, everybody loves the new pope. Anything to mention? Cool that he's from Chicago.
Yeah, I like that he's part of the Augustinian order, the sort of vow of poverty, itinerant traveler kind of pope. If you've ever seen In the Name of the Rose, the people who travel around and don't like stay in one place, they do good works by traveling around and actually like moving. There's a whole branch of the Catholic Church that does that, where they travel around and they do stuff, they volunteer, they preach, and they rely on the charity and help of others. But the whole point there is that it's a continuation in some senses of the nicer Pope. Remember when I mentioned it's either going to be nicer or meaner? This is on the nicer spectrum. He is a complicated Pope. There's some issues related to, how do I explain it?
He didn't take a firm stance on a particular issue.
On the enforcement of punitive measures for the scandals of, at least from what I read, that there was one when he was in a position of authority for disciplinary measures, that there was one person in particular that I guess was advanced within the Catholic Church that perhaps shouldn't have been because of the scale of the problem. But that's the Catholic Church, right? The organization is going to protect itself, and they're going to have internal disciplinary measures instead of, if they can, instead of be subject to external issues. Like we're seeing that play out right now in Washington State, where they came up with that law that says that the Priests have to report from the confessional, and the Catholic Church said, look, you can't do it. You'll all be excommunicated if you do that, if you break the confessional seal. So that's the kind of tension that exists with organized religion when you have that sort of separation of church and state. The church is imposing its own laws, right, on how their staff operate. In this case, priests saying, "Look, you'll be out of a job, right? You will never ever work as a priest again if you're excommunicated if you comply with this law." And so there is a real tension. It's going to be battled out in court, right? It's going to be litigated because it's one of those things. It's existential to the nature of the profession that the confessional seal is sacred. That goes way back.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is that as far as I can tell, he's a institutionalist, but he's got some more progressive views and compared to the full church, and he definitely cares about the poor, much like Francis did. And
Yeah.
also the name, right? So the name Leo is a big indication because the last Leo was a huge reformer for workers' rights and for labor rights and for unions during the industrial age. We're talking about right around that time when workers were trying to compete for rights. The previous Leo was the one who was very outspoken about. I mean, he did a whole bunch of things that made it very clear that the Catholic Church is on the side of workers as opposed to on the side of capital, right? There's a very real distinction when you care about human rights and dignity. And so I think that's what we're going to see is that the new pope cares very much about worker rights and labor rights and all that stuff. That's names are really important for popes because that's their first way that they signal to the world, this is who I'm going to be, this is what I care about, this is how I'm going to act as a pope. And so that I think it was something I noticed. He's going to be a reformer.
Okay, cool. More to come on that.
We shall see.
All right. There are protests at Columbia University. What are the protests about? And a grander question I have is that often it seems like these protests occur in areas like universities or cities where the population is more likely to be sympathetic than other places, than average, to the cause of the protesters. So I'm just thinking about this from the sense of we had a lot of protests right after Trump was elected in 2017. And we had the whole time various protests, and there was Black Lives Matter in 2020, and it seemed like that was a course of history, that the protests were following the course of history. Then you get this election, and I don't know. I guess I'm thinking too grandly here, but does the protest accomplish what it sets out to accomplish? So what does it set out to accomplish, and what does it accomplish? What is it about?
As far as I can tell, the two big things the protesters want is divestment from Israel for Colombia. They don't want Colombia to spend any money on any company that works with Israel or spends money on Israel, or they don't want any investments whatsoever in Israel proper from Colombia. And then the other one is a sort of much more sweeping one, which is human rights for Palestine and making sure that Colombia is outspoken about supporting human rights for the Palestinian people. The big one, the reason that they're specifically occupying buildings seems to be this divestment effort, which is there's a term for BDS, boycott, divest, and I don't remember what the S one is, but the whole point is that they're trying to, or no, boycott, divest, sell. They're trying to essentially remove any financial connection. And it's not just Columbia, it's a lot of these other universities. So University of Washington had a similar protest happen where they took over an engineering building. It was the same deal. They want the UW to divest from Boeing. In Columbia's case, they want Columbia to divest from any company that does business with Israel or Israel itself. That's the big ask. Now, to the other question, is it going to work? I'm not so sure. So when you look at protest movements, the rise of our current political climate can actually be traced back to the backlash against hippies, against the protests against the Vietnam War. That's where you see the rise of people like Reagan, and they set the foundation for where we're at now because Reagan was the one who did the sweeping tax cuts for the very wealthy that led to the extreme inequality that we're currently seeing in terms of income inequality. if you look at the breakdown of who voted for Trump and why they said they voted for Trump, there was a significant number who said they voted for Trump because of economic reasons, specifically high inflation and the lack of finding a decent job. And their arguments was because of the border and because of inflation. That's an old method of trying to convince voters to vote for you. You blame other
Yeah.
people. You say they're coming in and taking the jobs, and then you blame the high prices because there's more people. And so you say there's more people and they want more stuff. And because they want more stuff, it's driving the price of everything up. Because if you have a limited supply and you have an excessive demand, then more people will pay more money for the existing supply, inflation. That's the whole thing. That's why there's probably going to be higher inflation for this tariff policy that happened. Because if you reduce the supply of things that are available, but like everybody wants the things that exist, like furniture and clothes and all that other stuff, the companies can still, anyways, it's a whole thing. But in terms of the protests, it's very specific that they want divestment. I don't think it's going to work. That there is a substantive difference between what they're doing as protests versus other protest movements. The big thing is that the protests that they're doing in Colombia have a tinge of violent rhetoric, and the actions they're doing aren't nonviolent protests. Specifically, in the example that I've been reading about was UW, where they defaced property, right? Where they damaged the engineering machines and the property within the UW engineering building. That's not a good sign. You don't win people
Right.
to your side as a protest movement if you damage property or if you do things that don't make it seem like the actors themselves who engage in the protests are of like good
Mhm.
moral character, right? No matter the thing you're protesting, if the protesters themselves are engaged in tactics that are just like anti-society in the sense that
Mhm.
they're trespassing or they're impeding the ability of people to just exist in a place, that's its own separate issue, right? Because the whole point of a protest movement is you're trying to convince people to believe in you so that enough people are make a loud enough clamor and you affect change. That's the civil rights
Mhm.
movement, right? That's the
Yeah.
sit-ins and the marches and the I have a dream speech. Like the whole
Right.
point is that you're trying to make a clear, unambiguous message. This is what we want. This is why it's a good idea and it's better than what we have. It's not so clear that the protesters in Columbia and the protesters at UW and other universities are making that kind of message because it's very
Yeah.
controversial and their tactics are very controversial because they're different than nonviolence. They're different than a unified front. They're
Right.
separate and divided.
Yeah, they are, and I don't know if this exactly reflects what you were saying, but it seems like some protesters view it like, I'll just put it this way. In the I Have a Dream speech, it was a beautiful, eloquent speech that will stand the test of time. And he talked about the nation rising up and living out the true meaning of its creed. And it was very clear what he was talking about in that message. That message was very directed and very specific. And specific in a way, and focused in a way, that it was nigh impossible to contradict, and really impossible to contradict with the same kind of skill that he put it forth. And what I mean to highlight in all of this is he didn't say in the I Have the Dream speech, oh, I also support the Great Society. Oh, and we need to get out of Vietnam now. He didn't say that. He was focused. And had he not been focused, lack of focus, you go too many avenues, your opponent really just has to twist your arm on one of the avenues. Go one avenue at a time, and one strategy at a time. Well, the one strategy at a time thing is what I'm thinking about in terms of they're defacing property. Why? This you could not, you, I cannot think, if they were actually against what the purported ends of the protest, I cannot think of a better action, a more effective action for them to take than to pretend and to actually go into the protest being like, I'm one of the protesters, and deface the property. They could probably think of something worse, actually. But the point is, it's like an inbuilt contraindication. And they're like, yeah, we're in the you struggle. What are you struggling for exactly? Be specific.
So let me give you an example of something that sends the weirdest message. So they're protesting out in the open for something very specific and trying to put their name to it while also wearing masks. And the whole
Mm.
issue is if you look at something like the civil rights movement or some of the other effective protest movements, they clearly, the protesters said, look at me. This is who I am. I am part of this society. I want to make a change. Hear me. This is a little bit different because they're trying to mask their identity while also trying to affect, I guess, social change. And that the whole issue is that you don't win people over if they don't understand who you are, because it effectively it creates this sort of like distance between the protesters and society as a whole if they look like masked crusaders, right? It's the difference between like Batman and Superman. Superman, no
Mm-hmm.
mask, right? Superman's
Yeah,
out there just doing Superman stuff, right? Batman hides his identity, engages
that's
in
right.
some underhanded tactics, right, to accomplish his goals. But that's the thing, right? That's like the difference. That's I think where there's this sort of animus against these protesters is that they're engaging in what might be viewed as anti-democratic tactics of
Mm.
protest because they want a democratic outcome, the divestment of resources to a specific thing, but they're engaged in anti-democratic practices to arrive at that democratic outcome. And so they're not winning hearts and minds, right? I guess it's more like a crusade than it is a unifying drive. And I think that's the issue with the protests is that they don't have a good strategy. And part of it, I think,
Mhm.
is because they're so divided that there's no like united group and that's all on the same page of what their tactics were and how to affect that change. But anyways, yeah, no, it's a bad idea to damage property because you don't win anybody over when you harm the commons, the things that everyone shares, because these are
Right.
libraries, right? Like it's a library. If you destroy books or you write on the shelves or you paint on stuff, bad. That's not good. That sends a terrible message
Mm-hmm.
because asking for a society that respects human rights, that respects democracy, that respects all sorts of like things that they're asking for, but they themselves are not acting in the same manner when they're
Mm-hmm.
damaging property or they're harassing people who are trying to just go to class. There's a difference and it sends all sorts of weird messages. It's not consistent. And that's why I think they're getting arrested. But
Yeah.
in terms of is the strategy effective at getting heard? Sure. It
Sure.
makes the news. We're talking about it because we
Yeah.
hear about it. It's the same as those protesters who throw like paint on art or chain themselves to a museum. Like we hear about it, we learn about it, but it's not so clear that the change is going to happen, that what they're trying to
Mhm.
accomplish. Because if they really wanted to make that kind of change, you have to run people for office. You have to get like the whole apparatus of
Yeah.
government on your side because they're the ones that control the levers of power. They can do sanctions. There's all sorts of tools that exist in a democracy, but they have to actually play the game, right? They have to actually convince people that the cause that they're arguing for and the protests that they're doing is something worthwhile to pursue. And it's not so clear that work is being done.
Isn't there a musical lyric like "Play the game, play the game"? I can't remember. Sounds like Beatles or something.
The whole
Uh,
point is like they're not participating in the democracy part of democracy.
yeah.
They're
Right.
trying to engage in tactics that are more totalitarian in nature. They're just saying, do what we say, or else we'll occupy your buildings and we'll damage your property. That's not an
Yeah.
effective way to convince someone to actually do what you're asking.
Okay. Great topic. Unfortunately, I got to move us on. When I said okay, so India and Pakistan apparently they're fighting. When I said are we on the brink? Yeah, they're on the brink of war. I meant are we on the brink in the old debate sense of are we on the brink of Armageddon? Maybe not Armageddon, some great world crisis.
Yeah, here's the deal. So long as nuclear weapons exist in any country, we're always, in some sense, on the brink because those countries can fail. Any one of those countries can fail. If they fail, bad things happen. Also, countries are vulnerable in some ways. The bigger the country, the more vulnerable they are. And that's where you get bad outcomes happening by people who have political goals separate from what the country wants. Because so long as the weapons exist and they're not safeguarded in an effective manner, there always is the possibility of Armageddon, those weapons can be used. But are we any closer than we were yesterday? Yeah, I'm sure we are because they're firing bombs at each other. They're using jets to fight. That's an escalation, and it doesn't seem like they're backing down. I think part of the issue too is JD Vance came out and said, "Oh, this is an issue between India and Pakistan." No, it's not. This is a world security issue for all countries, right? Because both India and Pakistan have nukes. So you want to make every effort to get them to just back down, right? Figure out a way to have off ramps and stop fighting. We don't want them to engage in all out war because all out war between two huge countries with big militaries, there's no
Mm-hmm.
winners there. It's going to be a long,
Yeah.
drawn out, terrible war. And the difference between Ukraine and Russia, for example, in their war, is that at some point Pakistan has, in particular, they've got a policy that if they feel their back is to the wall, they feel they have an existential threat to them as a country, because they will probably lose against India. What with India having, I don't know, 4 times as much people, 5 times, like India can just throw people at them just nonstop forever. They have a policy in Pakistan that they will use nuclear weapons to defend the existence of their country. That's not good. You want to just not have the situation get to that point. And the only way to do that is to have all the other countries in the world show up and say, stop doing this. Figure out a way to work out your differences, de escalate, back down.
Right. Given that it's two nuclear countries, at the end of the day, those two countries will still be there, is my calculation. I would feel. Well, forget about what I feel. Pakistan, I don't think really needs to do that. And the reason I'm thinking that they don't need to do that is that they got a lot of. The families in that part of the world, or in any part of the world really, aren't just on one side of the border. Families span borders. And so you got a lot, because a lot of Pakistanis, and the parents of Pakistanis, moved there from India, the territory of present-day India, in the 40s, and I don't know, maybe before. And so, if India is pushing Pakistan's back to the wall, they're not going to have a Pacific population. They're not going to have a population of just, oh, my mother country is getting overrun, just another Monday. They're not going to do that. No, they're going to. So I hope that both countries see that it can't go very far, and that the argument to be made to Pakistan is India's size and their current whatever. Pakistan knows what the dealio is. It can't go on forever, and the sooner it ends, the less is destroyed, and the better for all people involved, and the better for all people of the world. So, peace, man.
Yeah, the one optimistic note is this has happened before between Pakistan and India. They've fought before. They've had these kinds of skirmishes before where they attack each other, they back down, they attack each other, they back down. If history is any indication, there is a will within these countries to not escalate. That this is, in some senses, just another Monday in this of them fighting each other in this manner because they've fought each other in this manner before. So the way we know that they're escalating is if they start blowing up the big buildings, if they start going after business districts and skyscraper things that are much more difficult to replace. Infrastructure. So if they start going after bridges, highways, any kind of essential infrastructure, power plants, right? If that happens, bad, because that means that they're very serious this time of engaging in a huge war. Because right now the fights are just military stuff. They're shooting at their bases and the stuff you would expect, right? Like the radars and the planes and all that stuff, which those are military targets. Where it gets bad is if they target the big stuff. The situation is bad. It's escalating. It's bad. But the major escalation would be the civilian infrastructure, the dams, power plants, any kind of thing that would cause serious, lasting, difficult to reverse harm. We'll see. Hospitals, if they attack a hospital, that'd be terrible. It would be awful. Yeah, I mean that the situation is developing and changing as we speak. It's certainly not over.
Mondays with Mike.